Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So today, they're supposed to arrest Trump or indict him. And that could cause a lot of problems. Because there's a lot of people that would be ready to protest and to revolt in a roundabout way. Because Trump has a lot of zealots. I really think that the political situation we're in is very, I don't know how to put it, it's razor thin right now. And it's just a matter of time before one side gets a little agitated enough to where they do something. Usually the left is the guy that does that. But being as New Mexico has had, northwest New Mexico has had 2 solid days of rain, which to me is kind of unheard of since I was a little kid. I was thinking about how would you weatherize your go-to rifle or your rifle. Now, if you have an AK, it is highly recommended that if you're in the ice and the snow to not lubricate. And I'm going off of Rob Ski's stuff from AKOU for the AK rifle. He also suggests that you don't lubricate it when it's super hot, like in the desert. And the reason why is it attracts dirt. Now that's why you do it, and don't do it during the summer. Now I would tell you to lightly oil anything, and just be careful about where you have your weapon so that it doesn't attract dirt. Or to cover up the holes in the AK with the dust cover. And to use your safety when you're supposed to, and not one of those cool ones that's cut out so that it'll allow you to hold the bolt open, unless you have to do that on a range. Because that actually makes sense to me that you would try to keep dust and dirt off your gun anyway. Now the AR-15. Let's talk about the AR-15. We're going to get back to the AK too. But in cold weather tests, it's usually shown that the AK outperforms the AR. And why is that? Because the tolerances in the AR are big enough, are tiny enough, that they don't have a lot of room. So when water gets into some place and it freezes, it expands. In the AK, there's a lot of loose places. In the AR, there isn't. So if it expands, what usually happens is a weapon will lock up. And if you watched any of those snow or ice tests that Ian and Carl have done, Tim from Military Arms Channel, or Grantham, they've been doing a lot of freezing guns to see what's going on. Usually the AR either has a magazine problem. If water gets into the area there where the mag release is, and it freezes the mechanism such that you can't get it open, or you can't use it, and you have to beat it to get it in, to get the magazine out. The same for the trigger group. Those pins allow just enough water to seep in to the receiver and to freeze the mechanism, the springs, and the hammers in place so that the trigger is really sticky. In sub-zero temperatures, the only way I have been told how to do this, to fix this, is to keep the gun slightly warmer than outside. And the only way I know to do that is to put it under your armpit. If you've ever watched an old movie called Battleground, where it had the M1 Garand, the guys were using M1 Garands, and it was in the Battle of the Bulge, you see them checking their action, which is part of military training, is to check your action every so often when you can, so that you know. That's kind of why the forward assist is there, so that you know that the gun isn't locked up. Now, they did that with the M1. I've even seen K98s get enough water in them to where they would freeze in New Mexico in certain conditions, especially around Cuba. I've had that happen. So checking your action every once in a while while you're walking around hunting or patrolling or whatever you're doing is a good thing. Now with an AK, checking that action, and I'm not talking about cycling it completely. I'm just barely causing the parts to move. So moving it just out of battery and then pushing it back. That causes enough of the stuff usually to free up or to move with ice. Now, if you can't do that and you have to keep going and whatever, and it's definitely that cold, you need to figure out other things. The heavier the oil, the thicker it's going to get during the winter. So if you use anything like lithium grease, like I do for my AR on the top of the rails of the bolt carrier, in the wintertime I don't do that. In the summertime, as I train, what usually happens is the grease gets thinner and it makes the gun wetter and it cycles a little better. However, it does attract a lot more dust and dirt. Anything you use, or anytime you use oil, it will attract dust. It always does. So use sparingly, and most of all, maintain your weapon. But if it gets wet, my brother Ronnie, his first AR, or his AR that he's was most proud of, his first AR rifle. If it got wet, he would quickly pat it dry and put it away. Well, the AR-15 is built to withstand weather, All this rain that we've had in northwest New Mexico, what I would tell you to do is after you got out of the weather, or you were drying off, to dry off your gun. And I would personally wipe it down with some oil if I could to prevent rust. Because that's where your rifle is going to get the most damage or not work for you right now in wet weather is because it'll oxidize. Especially in New Mexico, it will oxidize over time because we're really dry. And once you've got that wet on there and it stays there, it'll get really oxidized really fast, but then you can wipe it off and it's good. It is not like back east where there's enough humidity in the air, though, that you can leave your rifle in the closet before all the new laws passed. And just the sheer humidity in the air would get in it, and you need to run a bore snake, wipe it down, because it'll rust or it'll corrode. This leads to another discussion, and I say this because I've had a hole in my roof back in the day. It's been fixed. I got a whole new roof. But anyway, I had water seep into one of my ammo cans, and the one failure I had to my AR was the rim of a cartridge rusted through, I guess, or rusted enough to weaken the metal that when it cycled, it broke the rim off. Now, that was either that or it was too hot of a case. Both could have been the case. But there was just enough rust on the case because when I got it out of the gun, I checked it out. But there's water, snow. In New Mexico, you have to worry about sand. And when I say that, we have sandstorms. If you're ever hunted in New Mexico during the summer or just hiked, it gets dry enough and windy enough that very fine sand finds very fine places to go into and make life miserable for rifles and handguns. So maintain your guns. That's the whole moral of this story. For weather, long-term storage. If you had to put them away for a long time, this is where things like Cosmoline, which is just really storage grease, would be used to put in places to make sure that there was no rust. It's a rust inhibitor, basically, for storage. It's just really thick grease that you have to clean out of the gun because it will turn into sludge, basically. And that's what happens with all grease eventually. if it gets old enough. How do you fix that? Well, Cosmoline is, since it's a grease, you're going to need a solvent, something like Hoppe's or something like Cosmoline Cleaner. They make such a thing. So what you would do is you would pack the barrel with grease or Cosmoline, and you'd wipe down the entire gun with grease, and then they would wrap it with wax paper back in the day, or plastic, and then they would store it for however long they wanted to, for years. And that's how a lot of weapons in the modern American arsenal are still, to this day, in the military, stored with Cosmoline. Now the Russians and the old surplus guys, that's how they did it a long time ago, and they continue to do it. But it made me think about cleaning your gun and just basically maintaining it because of what we're seeing with weather in New Mexico currently. You know, we're springtime, and as much as people would like to say that there's a lot of weather. So what are your tried and true ways of cleaning your gun? You know, after a range session, if it's, you know, more than 100 rounds, I clean a gun. I'll even punch the bore of a rifle with a bore snake to make sure I clean out the crap that's in the barrel. Now, I don't go nuts. There was a point in time I used to, but there isn't really a necessary need to do that. In fact, you'll end up tearing up the bore of your rifle if you spend too much time on it. But making sure there's dust and dirt out of your action and out of your gun, and excess carbon, is a good thing. So, if you've done that, usually weather isn't a problem. It's when you have to stay in the weather, i.e. hunt, that becomes more of an issue. So, make it a nightly routine on your hunt. As you unload your rifle when you get back to camp, go ahead and wipe it down with oil. That'll usually protect your investment and your firearm, and that's the long and the short of it all. When it comes to modern rifles, match your weather or match your lubricant to the weather. The hotter it is, the lighter you want it in New Mexico. And I say that because you don't want it to attract dust and dirt. The colder it is, kind of the lighter you want it again. It's opposite of what you would use for like regular cars, because back in the day you used to use a heavier oil when it was hotter so that you would get it to stay longer on the parts as they heated up. And there's still some validity to that if you're shooting a lot at the time. I say that because COP is a great thing. There's a reason why military COP is what it is. It's matched for certain types and conditions that usually match most of what the weather conditions are. If you're in an extreme environment, look for better lubricants that are associated with those weather conditions. Like, share, subscribe, be great.